allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Is the truth, is the fair all concerned, with the goodwill of better riches, will be beneficial to all concerned.
As our Sergeant of Arms report.
We have 18 members in attendance today, and we have one guest that got attendance. My friend John, he's been once before. Y'all welcome down.
Rick, you have our birthdays?
Yes, I did, Mr. President. Short list for today. Kind none. We're wedding anniversary coming up. 31st. 11 years. Congratulations. Way to go. All right, that'll be on the 31st. Yeah, that's a cool report for you today. All right.
Wow. Bobby, are you happy though?
You got me. You ready for that? Happy dollars.
Woo-hoo!
Yeah, for the Vale family, welcome to the new grandson. Luke and Andrew, born Monday. Third grandson.
I was just telling the table earlier, I was blessed with an opportunity to spend 2 days host. Full moon, I was out on the front deck of my in-laws beachfront place, and all of a sudden I see this blob emerge from the ocean. You know, one of the giant turtles came out, did her thing. We got a crowd around, you know, everybody did this. So I don't know, about 12 weeks later, I'm like, make it next
Yeah, we got a little boy Wilder here. We leave Mark for a job. Yes, sir.
Put your money to a manhole, bro.
Well, you think that all written, please?
Yeah. But every now and then I get some back, right?
Oh, you do.
Wilder started a job on Monday, tomorrow for Atlanta, and last day in Green he asked me to come to Rotary. So how about that?
Over there, new network services, and everything was going wrong. Right up until morning, it was the last day we had it, everything fell into place. And I'm getting your nigga as much as that point. And just give you that. All right.
I actually have two crumpled up. We had a great 505 yesterday at the loaded grape. I didn't even count, I lost count, maybe 25 people. Greensboro Rotary was represented, Summit Rotary, Crescent, Sunset Club, and Gate City. And we've had probably 4 or 5 guests, and one person said they were joining. So please, you know, the initiative this year is for every member to bring a guest or bring a member. So think about who in your network you can invite to Rotary, and they can come and have a great breakfast with us, socialize and learn more about Rotary. So that was it.
All right, great. Any more?
Grandpa Lewis is moving.
John, order.
Grandpappy made a pronouncement. Do not walk behind me, for I may not leave. Do not
Do not walk beside me either. It's pretty much. leave you the hell
I think Danielle had, another one?
Yeah, I just wanted to send out, you guys know, a couple of reminders before I, So for the invitation on August 5th, we have James Barlow, Dale Barlow, here to 12, Matthew Foster, here next week, and then Rock Zeller, here the 26th of August. I'm pleased to mention with the 505 Silver Tongue Wednesday, we're gonna try to do the scavenger hunt that I created several months ago. Downtown. So the way it will work, we'll send out some information to each check your email. I know we send a lot of emails, but we'll send instructions about the activation codes. So it'll take place downtown, kind of started at the Wells Fargo building, go into the Power Park, back on the Elm Street, and then we're gonna try and rendezvous somewhere around like 90 for the map to do the 505 that way. So bring friends, bring potential members, reactivation codes, it'll be a good time.
And it's also family friendly.
Family friendly, yeah, I wrote this for everyone in mind. So like here in Pollard, did it with her entire family, children included. So, bring the kids, that's the whole point. Is getting them together.
Great. I think Taylor Coble was supposed to be here this morning. Michelle, do you want to mention anything about our youth services? Sure. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think most of you received an email last night that we're doing a school supply drive.
Yes, so our youth services met, and there's a supply drive for Case High School that we went out yesterday. With great list of pretty normal school supplies. So if you forget your list, just go to the aisle. Just bring it to next week. We're going to be donating to high school students that do need a lot of supplies, including free ring binders. That's a big one. Also, we're looking ahead to partnering with the middle school and elementary school this year, probably in the same area of the Page District. So you'll be hearing more information about that later. Specifically, we're probably going to do book drive with specific books. For example, middle school class sets of books, for a particular book that the art department cover, as well as elementary school. We're going to look at some books on character education as our theme to donate to our elementary school library. So that's what's coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So at this time, I don't have any other announcements, and I think
Judge Hassel supposed to introduce the
Judge Hassel is supposed to introduce our speaker today. Maybe he's.
Good morning, folks.
Can't hear him.
Let's try again.
No, turn them off.
Oh, can't hear him.
Wouldn't be the first time I've been muted.
We're having technical difficulties.
All right, I can hear you guys.
Yeah, audio's not working, so
Let's try now.
want to take a shot?
You want to do it again? Don't tell me I'm muted for good here for my good friend Jerry.
Somebody do lip sync in front of that camera.
All right. I was going to tell you about my good friend Jerry.
But Jerry was invited to speak to us this morning by Jim Kennedy and Judge Hassel, and he's going to speak to us on immigration. And I'll let you further announce.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody.
Okay, guys.
Judge, sorry, I couldn't hear all the good things you were gonna say about me, but
That's right.
email it in. Okay. I guess the first question, Bobby, do I need to pay you so everybody else is giving you dollars so they can talk?
The speaker.
But we'll take your money. Okay, I'm sure you would, are you with the IRS? I'm a little bit intimidated because I was walking over to get my food a little while ago, and our guest, I didn't catch your name, I'm sorry, but he was walking the other way and he looked at me and said, good luck. Immigration, context for you here. How many remember Pat Paulson, the comedian who ran for president? He was quoted one time as saying, all the problems that we've got, not just immigration, every problem we've got in America is traceable to a dysfunctional immigration system of the American Indian. Usually when I tell that joke, I get these blank stares because everybody's about 20 years younger than you guys. Good going. Okay, they told me I was supposed to talk about and give you a brief overview of the U.S. immigration system. We don't have enough days for me to do that. But we have, Lisa's got, and she'll pass it out later, I've got a chart that you can look at later if you've got nothing else to do and you need to go to sleep. This will put you to sleep. But I'm gonna give you a real quick overview. 3 parts to our immigration system. Big, broad brush. Cases are based on family relationships, so husband, wife, parent, child, parent, nuclear family. A second group is just a miscellaneous place where we put a bunch of stuff like asylum. Everybody know what DACA is, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals for the little kids that came in when they're little bitties. Some of them are in their 30s now. There's just a whole sort of smorgasbord of kinds of cases that don't fit anywhere else. And then there's a third group of cases that are based on employment relationships. And I will talk about that a little bit more. But those are our 3 major parts of what we call the benefits side, where you sponsor somebody or you're asking for a relative, you're asking for a potential employee to come in and be able to work and that sort of thing. The other side of our system is enforcement. And enforcement is deportation, or as we call it now, because we're politically correct, removal. We don't call it, we're not deporting people, we're simply removing them. I do a lot of deportation defense. I'm down in Charlotte in front of the judges down there. It's not the federal judge system that we all know, the Article 3 judges. It's not state court. It's a federal system. It's part of the Department of Justice. And there's a big brouhaha that y'all have not seen, but there's a union of all the judges who are employed by the Department of Justice, and they basically want to become independent because it is so easy, regardless of who's in the White House, for this system to get politicized. There was an incredible enforcement priority during the last administration. And when I say priority, I mean, it was just free for all. Everybody that got in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they got arrested and they were put in removal. We went from a case backlog before that administration of about 300,000 to 400,000 cases to over 1.3 million now. And guess what's happened? The whole system has come to a grinding halt. We've got people that we're defending in removal court who are hardworking, tax-paying. Yeah, they pay taxes. You can pay with what's called not a social security number, with an ITIN, individual taxpayer ID number. They are family people, they are religious, they acknowledge authority. They come from countries where authority is totally corrupt, so they're a little intimidated, a little afraid. But as a general matter, they are the kind of people we would like to have here. And so everybody's first or next question is, well, why don't they get in line? Why don't they do like everybody else? All right. Okay, there's at least one of these at each table. All right, about 5 pages in, there's a page that's called comparison chart. And this is our employment-based system. All right, down kind of in the bottom left corner, there's a couple of blank boxes. What that represents is an absence of a visa category that we used to have from 1942 to 1964. It's called the bracero. Anybody know what brazo means in Spanish? Arm. Manual laborers, carpenters, people working in the yard, construction, roofers, food processing. All the crappy jobs that US workers either don't do or don't want to do, can't do or don't want to do, are done by, foreign nationals. The vast majority of whom are undocumented. Every bite that you took this morning ultimately was touched by undocumented hands. All right, how many people say illegal as opposed to undocumented? Okay, say undocumented. And the reason that you should say undocumented, this is obviously my opinion, is because if you say illegal, the discussion that comes from your gut. If you say undocumented, it's more of a let's figure out what's the problem here. How many people are in this room know that they're US citizens? Okay, if you were in court, how would you prove that? You would testify, I was born here. Okay, but you don't remember that. You just know that people told you that. What documents would you show to prove you're a US citizen? Okay, US passport? Okay, what are those? Documents. You are documented. Okay, you're not legal. Well, you're over 21, so you're legal. But, okay, I'm gonna sit down for a second here. I get tired of standing up. And if the camera gets goofed up, my apologies. But let me just say to you, the purpose of our entire system is to determine on a logical basis who comes in and who doesn't come in. That's fair enough approach to the whole thing. The people who come in need to fit into the system we just described a minute ago. And if they don't fit into that system, it just raises another question. Are they breaking a law that we want to keep, or are they breaking a law that needs to be changed? And let me come back to the point I made a second ago. 1942, we faced a huge problem. Something happened in December of 1941. Everybody knows what that was. Okay, and we got dragged into World War II. Within 6 months, maybe a year, we lost probably 10, 11 million hardworking people who now were doing something else. The people that ran the US economy were US women and Mexican men and Mexican women, primarily. The Mexican citizens who came in under the Bracero program. Lasted from 1942 to 1964. It almost crashed during the time right before the Korean conflict, but once that started up again, we had a lot of other people, got involved in that. It's a supply demand issue. If you don't have enough workers, you need to find them somewhere else. So our immigration system responded to that. Congress created this system, and we had a legal way for people to come in. 1964, that system, or that part of the system, was terminated. And it's kind of ironic, that's when all the Title VII legislation went through, but the Bracero program was terminated, and we have never had a temporary work visa for people that do manual labor on a year-round basis. I'll give you an example. If Bill Gates here calls you and says, well, you just look like him. Okay. I know you don't do the kind of stuff that he's now accused of doing. And calls you and says, I want you to build a 500,000 square foot warehouse or big facility where we're going to put all the computer design engineers that I'm going to locate here in Guilford County. You would need skilled workers of all kinds of variety, brick masons, the carpenters, electricians, everybody like that for 2 or 3 years. I mean, that's a huge project. If you couldn't find enough domestic workers and you didn't want to sponsor people for permanent status, a green card, you would call me or some other immigration lawyer and say, look, I need to have all these, workers. I've located a bunch of skilled workers in Mexico and Guatemala and some up in Canada and so on. I need to get them here for probably 2.5 years. And I would tell you, looking at that little chart, you can't do it. It doesn't exist in our system. Now, so everybody's reaction is going to be, why didn't Congress do something about it? And that's the answer. Congress has to do something about it. They won't do anything because as soon as anybody starts advocating for creating a visa category for people that do that kind of work, immediately the next time they're running for re-election, the stump speech they hear on the other side is, he's giving your job away. Right? Okay, he's taking your jobs away from you. Well, that's horse hockey. We've got hundreds of thousands, if not millions of jobs in the United States that are filled by people who don't have college degrees, who come to work every day and do the kind of work that Americans don't do or can't do, choose not to do, and keep our economy running. And it's not just the food on your table, it's the people that build the chairs that we're sitting in, the tables that we're leaning on. It's throughout our economy. And it's a political issue. It's the radioactive third rail of politics. If you're talking about immigration, you need to be really, really careful. And that's why Congress hadn't taken action so far. It's primarily a problem. I'll come back and say it's primarily a problem in the House of Representatives, because we all get this. As soon as somebody gets elected, the next week, if you gave money to that campaign, you get a solicitation. They are always running for re-election in the House because it's a 2-year period. The only shot we've got at getting reform legislation this term that started in January this year is now to December, because in January, forget it. The election is on. So, yes, sir.
I just don't know how many people can hear if there's no legislation or process to support it for years. Regardless.
They come in without permission.
So that's where the word by inference legal comes in. And so you know I'm for the inference. I'm from Canada.
Hey.
So, and I'm running under the same context.
It's a document.
It's the undocumented.
So I am very well versed in this, and I see the challenges. And I would just say, as an outsider, it's the minute and DACA seems to be a hot topic. Every time I hear anything about immigration, this total comprehensive immigration aspect, rather than just attacking, one piece at a time. And that is very, very.
Yeah, our whole system is about 35 years out of date.
Right.
Seriously. My opinion is, if you're going to get reform, you need to do it kind of piecemeal, because if you try to do a comprehensive bill, it's sort of like Obamacare. Nobody can read. It's too much. You need to slice it and dice it.
What happened in 1964 to change that scenario?
The question was, what happened in 1964? It was a bunch of strange bedfellows. The people that were subject to all these rules, and it was, the Department of Labor was overlooking all the employers who were employing these Bracero workers. It's primarily the Southwest U.S. farmers, and they hated being supervised by the U.S. government, so they were opposed to it. Does everybody remember Cesar Chavez? Okay, he led the lettuce strike, all the farm workers out in California. Well, all of them hated that program too, because it was so poorly supervised. They were all getting horrible working conditions and so on. Those two groups joined together to convince Congress to terminate the program. It was crazy, but that's what happened.
It's also interesting to note that 1964 was the year of the passage of the Civil Rights Act, which
It was ironic. It's really crazy. If you want to read a book about this whole dynamic, there's a book called Beyond Smoke and Mirrors. It's written by a guy named Doug Massey, who was a professor at Princeton. And it's about 75 pages. It's just a long pamphlet, really. It's the best history of that program or that whole dynamic I've ever seen.
Jerry?
Yep.
Jerry.
There was a political advocate for a comprehensive reform package, Rubio. What did you think of Mark Rubio?
Yeah.
It was okay. It was similar to about 7 or 8 other proposals that started in 2003 or 04. It was kind of a new version of that original legislation, which was proposed by Ted Kennedy and John McCain, who were very diametrically opposed on everything other than this. And the reason they came together with a good proposal because they made it apolitical. They made it economics. And it really made a lot of sense, but it never got anywhere.
So, I mean, it's obvious, everybody in this room 100% will agree the system's broken. But here, this is my opinion, is the problem isn't immigration. The
problem is term limits. Quit letting these guys constantly work towards their next term and start working towards doing their job. And you would solve the immigration problem, in my opinion.
I think that's right. I tend to agree with you very strongly. The problem that we're gonna run into is that is part of the Constitution, and you'd have to have an amendment to the Constitution. And if you had the mischief that could come out of the Constitutional Convention is unimaginable. You're right. That's exactly right. It's the 2-year term. What you need to do is expand it to maybe 4 years and then push the senators out and then say, at this point, you're done. But you need more than 2 years. Okay, yeah.
I work for a nonprofit financial institution. The last 20 years we've been doing IT home mortgages and found folks to be on the debt, which is actually works well. And can you just take a minute and talk about, because folks are here undocumented and work, you pay taxes. What about the eligibility for benefits for the taxes?
Let me say the last part again.
Eligibility for government benefits based on the taxes.
Yeah, it's essentially their kids can go to school here without. I mean, any child is eligible to go to school. Immigration status is irrelevant up through the end of high school.
The monetary things that we're all accustomed to, like Social Security, the IRS gives them an ITIN, and so they can same taxes. Don't get anything else.
That's right. There are just like every other group of people, there's some people that game the system and they'll pay less taxes than they're supposed to. They'll claim more exemptions than they really should. But, there's a bunch of gringos out here doing that too. So it's not perfect, but by and large, they pay the taxes they're supposed to. They really are careful to acknowledge and follow authority. It's a really good group of people. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
This summer in traveling at hotels and things, you may notice that hotels don't necessarily clean your room every day, right? And I've learned through asking questions that they're short of staff, obviously, because they can't hire everybody they need. And normally, for example, in Virginia Beach, they would sponsor, that's my hometown, they would sponsor, I don't know, over 1,000 Ukrainians to come in the summers to work in the travel and tourism industry, and learned recently that number was cut back to like 300 this summer or something. They normally might get 1,200, they only got 300 because there's some rule or law or something that somebody put in place about how many of those could come. So with the current immigration and all the people that probably are employable, maybe ready to work, but don't have the paperwork, does our system allow, like you said, if somebody calls and says, I need 200 hotel workers for Virginia Beach, can you help me out? What does an employer do to start sponsoring people who are already here? Is there a process clearly defined for that or even available?
Well, I object to the form of the question.
The form of the question, you can reword it any way you want. I'm a teacher, reword that question.
Yeah, there are a lot of moving parts. We do have a temporary visa category. It's called H-2B for people that are going to work less than a year. And that's why I made the distinction when I gave the example of people working more than a year. We do have a temporary visa category, the H-2B, for people that work. There's an H-2A for agricultural temporary, and then the H-2B is for non-agricultural temporary work. So you can sponsor those folks. It's complicated, time consuming, and you need to be sponsoring 200 people at a time for it to work economically. There's several steps that you have to go through, and there's a limit of 66,000 a year that's been bumped up to, I think, 86,000. I think an additional 20,000, but that's for the whole country. It's absurd. I think what may have happened for the situation that you're talking about, there's also a ban on travel for people from what we call the Schengen countries, which is Western Europe, plus the UK, Ireland, Brazil, China, and Iran. They're all subject to a travel ban, and to get out from under it, they have to do one of two things. Well, one of three things. They have to be parents or spouses or children of U.S. citizens or permanent residents, or they have to get a national interest exemption, which is hard to get, or they have to go to a non-banned country for 2 weeks, and then they can come over. But they gotta have a visa to come over if they're outside the US. And to get a visa, you have to go to a US consulate and be interviewed and so on and so forth. To get an interview, these days you're needing to wait for about a year. That's the backlog that's arisen because of the pandemic and because of the prior administration's efforts not to slow down immigration, but to terminate immigration. And that's probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but it isn't much.
No, it's true. I came in with NAFTA, I got a call. I took so I'm 8 years university, 3 degrees. Took me 2 years, 6 lawyers. We finally gave up and I went to the United States consulate in Montreal. Sat in a hotel for 3 days. It was only 3 days in the day.
Yeah.
And during during the last administration, remember, I can't vote. There was a concern that people like myself in the NAFTA would have to leave. It was that bad. But I've been here for 15 years, started a family, married an American, and it didn't matter because I'm still a Canadian citizen. So my son can have dual citizenship. It is very hard to get in the United States. I don't care what kind of person you are, if you're undocumented, it's very hard, even with the current resources.
Truth is, our country was built on it. We're all.
So it's a political call. My experience.
Everybody in this room.
We are, but at the same time, we got to recognize we cannot accept everybody in the world. We don't have unlimited resources. We don't have unlimited resources, so we can't take everybody. But our system ought to work consistently with the law of supply and demand, and it does in a lot of the business categories like TN. It recognizes professionals and a lot of different types of jobs that we really do need here in the United States. So that visa category is created, and all of our business-related categories do recognize the law of supply and demand, except in that one instance for but for skilled workers who don't have a college degree, and you don't need a college degree to do whatever the work is. We don't have that visa category, and until we get some political courage, which frankly the current makeup of Congress is better than it's ever been, and Biden is pushing this thing too. So there's a proposal out there that's being worked on in various subcommittees. So we may see something. It's the best chance we've seen in years. So, the last thing I had, let me grab this. There's there's a presumption that when you do this stuff for a living, the research skills must be phenomenal. And that's why I have paralegals, because they know how to do all that stuff. And I tell them, okay, here's the issue, go find this. The other thing that we do, and I'm a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. There's about 15,000 of us. And we trade emails all the time because none of us know the answers to many of these questions. So here's what I got from a colleague. The DS-260 is the visa application for a green card. What would be the best advice for the DS-260 for someone with schizophrenia? The question on the form asks, do you have a mental or physical disorder that poses or is likely to pose a threat to the safety or welfare of yourself or others? We have a doctor's letter stating that he poses no risk to himself or anyone, but should he decompensate and relapse, he could potentially pose a threat to himself. Should I answer the question based on the doctor's letter or according to the possibility of what could happen if he relapses? I don't know.
What could happen if you relapse?
Well, I think that's probably right, but everything you file with the Immigration Service or the State Department is a form. And they don't have a box that says, or if he relapses, it's an area where you need to be an artist, and everybody that you're talking to is a scientist. And it's nuts. It is really nuts. It's a very interesting area though. And what I would encourage you to do is, this is one of the most positive conversations I've ever had in a group setting. I would encourage you to talk to your family about it in the same way that we've talked this morning. And if you have an opportunity, is anybody here in Kathy Manning's district? Kathy's working on this stuff. She practiced law with me for several years in the immigration field. She's very, very interested in getting some results that can work for everybody. So give her some attaboys next time you talk to her.
Isn't he actually getting politicians or government, you know, you mentioned economics, getting business leaders, or that, you know, non-partisan, you know, apolitical committee, identify the business need and start, you know, that way no one will say, you know, to your point, the minute someone politically sticks the neck out, someone's gonna have their head up.
Yeah, all of us have taken clients to talk to members of Congress. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce is very, very active. So there's a lot of push going on.
I mean, if you've gone to a restaurant, the service is slow, hotels, I mean, pick an industry. Where I have 3,000 people who make offers, they don't even respond.
Yeah.
It's very hard to get good people these days.
How many undocumented people are in the United States?
Nobody knows.
An estimate.
Yeah, between 10 and 20 million.
10 and 20 million, and that's what, 3% of the population? So if you don't realize this is a huge problem that needs to be solved, more, it should be part of the process.
I'm going to step back. Go ahead. No, you're right. You're right. Okay, somebody had a hand up. The question was, is the process expensive?
Become a U.S. citizen.
Yeah, it's very, very lengthy too. You can't just apply to become a citizen. You have to be a permanent resident for 5 years unless you're married to a U.S. citizen, and it's 3. Before you can become a permanent resident, if you're coming in without a relative sponsoring you, you're coming in through a business-based case typically, and that can take, 3 or 4 years to go through that process before you become a permanent resident. So it takes a long time. Ever heard the term parachute baby?
Yes.
Okay, it's the idea that women come to the United States to have their children so they can become citizens, and then the kid can sponsor them. One thing people don't realize is for that child to sponsor that parent, the child has to be 21. It doesn't happen tomorrow. It's a 21-year wait. So it does work, and people game the system and do that, but it doesn't happen as quickly as the idea would imply.
Your opinion, obviously, you know a heck of a lot more about this than the rest of us. Why do you think our current administration refuses to close the border on the south side? I mean, I don't, what do you think's going on?
Well, I'm going to disagree with the premise of your question. They're not just standing back and say, oh yeah, come on in. You've got to start with the proposition that we as a country are signatory to the International Treaty on Refugees. And that treaty requires us to allow people to come to the border and present their case that they need protection under our asylum laws. That is, a person who's outside the U.S. is called a refugee. If they're in the United States, they're an asylee. That's the same thing. Okay. We do not have the right until we withdraw from that treaty to shut the border down and say, you get to wait in Mexico and I hope you're alive when you come to your hearing. And it's that dangerous in that country. The statistics show that if we allow people in and then we assign them a date to show up in court, over 80% of them show up, and it's closer to 90% if they're represented by counsel. There are a few that don't. And part of it is they don't have an address that's reliable, et cetera. So we have the ability to monitor folks. You can put an ankle monitor on people so you can find them. There are all kinds of advocacy groups who do everything they can to make sure people show up, and they help them prepare their case and so on. So I respectfully disagree with the idea that we're just opening the border. We're under an obligation to allow people to present those cases. And again, if we have legislation that would allow people to qualify under this, what used to be the Bracero program, you would not have people trying to come in without permission. Because a lot of them are coming in and they're dying. They pay a coyote and the coyote just dumps them in the desert and they're dead. So it's a mess. Yeah.
Yeah. What about all the people coming across the rivers or everywhere else, and they're not coming to a station, they're not coming to an office, they're not coming to a lawyer's office, they're not asking, they're not coming in. I realize they're totally undocumented, but I mean, the means are there to stop that and then have it be, orderly and proper. But anyway, never mind.
No, your point's well taken. In the 1940s, 50s and so on, when we had the Bracero program in place, the number of undocumented people that were caught coming in was about 40,000 a year. Before we had the program, it had spiked to about 1 million a year, and after the program was terminated, it went up to about 900,000 a year. The way to secure, not to close the border, but to secure the border is to have that visa category. Because your choice, if you're sitting on the other side of the border, is I pay, $5,000 to a coyote and maybe I die, or I pay $300 as a visa fee and I've got a job waiting for me. Easy choice.
So you're saying virtually everybody that would show up at that point and sign up and yeah, they're gonna go get a job. And that's the solution, is keep the borders open, but just say register here and you get a job.
No, thank you for asking that question. What I'm suggesting is that if there's a visa category, it should match up with economic supply and demand. And if as an employer, I want to sponsor you to come to the States, there may be the category that I'm going to use should require me to advertise and recruit and determine that I can't find a U.S. worker. That's really a green card step. There's no reason we can't do that in the temporary visa category as well. And if I can show that I cannot find a U.S. worker after a reasonable amount of recruitment, then I should be able to sponsor you.
But what would be illegal about us maintaining a border where we control who is coming across and we know everyone that's coming in, they do sign up for a program, and we said, wait, you can't. We said, you can't really. It doesn't do stop them at our border that we say.
It's all broken.
Well, no, I don't disagree with that idea.
Yeah.
It can be controlled. It cannot be shut down perfectly. It's just impossible. We have the technology to do that. But what I'm saying is, if you have a visa category that's available for people who would otherwise come without permission, and they can qualify for that, they are going to choose that because it's safer and less expensive, and there's no reason not to. It doesn't exist today, and
do they have to have a job waiting or know of that type of job?
yeah, that's the
So
idea.
all these folks that we see just coming right now, I would assume they don't have jobs waiting or there's nothing waiting for them.
They don't.
What would they be told if we could control it and say you one by one and we report it? What would we say to those people? They still.
Well, right now, we have no way for people to be legally employed in the United States for a large number of these folks. What I'm suggesting, and today, we've got a demand on this side of the border for those kind of workers, and there's a supply over there. Okay, that demand supply dynamic doesn't go away. What I'm saying is our immigration system ought to facilitate a legal entry for those people that are going to supply the labor that we demand.
And if you think about and really ask the question, why do people want to come? Why are they willing to uproot their lives? If they had a good situation where they wouldn't be willing to do that.
There are lots of reasons. There are a lot of refugees who are fleeing because their lives are in danger, and there are a lot of economic refugees because things back home are just horrible. And that's the push. And the pull here is strong too, because we need that labor.
Question, one comment, can you drop the name alien resident from Mississippi called alien? And the question, as the current administration, I know I have here, but has the current administration changed the H-1B numbers? I know the last.
Not yet. They're working. Kathy Manning's on a committee that's working on
Yeah.
that. The administration has decreed that the entire U.S. government stop using the word alien. You're now a non-citizen. Okay. It's more better. All right, one more question.
Yeah, do you have any idea what's being done about COVID? I mean, the current administration is obviously more progressive on immigration. More and more people are coming in, but yet they're also very progressive about stopping COVID. So those two things sort of seem to go against each other. You got
That's why that travel.
undocumented immigrants running in with COVID
Yeah.
coming through our communities, and that doesn't make any sense, does it?
Yeah, I agree. The irony too of the ban against these various countries is you cannot imagine how much time we just spent getting the CEO of a multinational company that does a lot of business 20 miles south of here into the United States. It was a fist fight. You just cannot imagine. The people who are automatically exempt are college students. Probably the most lackadaisical, non-careful people in the world. Come on in. I'd pick the people coming in on the southern border, but before I let those guys in. It's a mess. It's a mess. Okay, we have one other.
Real quick question. You did have an effective system in order to monitor and allow potential citizens. The supply of jobs ebbs and flows. How do you imagine that would work when we have an economic downturn? Jobs are not as plentiful. Where do these people rest in that interim period for the economy?
Well, for one, the best answer is it's not going to work perfectly. I agree. The visa category that we've been chatting about would be limited in time. Like an H-1B.
Right.
H-1B is good for 3 years. The TN's now good for 3 years, and then you can extend it for 3 more. I mean, we can't get rid of the TNs for a lot of different policy reasons. This temporary visa category under the Kennedy-McCain proposal was going to be 3 years with a 3-year extension. So it's not perfect, but if there is some kind of a test of the labor market that's required, then that would kind of answer the question. If you want an extension, but you can't prove that there are no U.S. workers, you're not going to get the extension. Okay. All right, I've really enjoyed being with y'all. Thank you so much for so many good questions.
Last tour for you. Thank you for coming. This was great.
Look, it's me. You want me to read the number?
Yes.
507-650.
Bobby.
650.
507.